Walking into the city of St. Louis, one might find themselves entranced by the grand steel frame of the Gateway Arch. In combination with shimmering lights and a serene landscape, the state of Missouri appears to give off a feeling of peace and protectiveness. Yet the establishment of Missouri could hardly be described as placid. The arguments that erupted from opposing efforts and attempts to create a state of abolition or slavery started from what is known as the Missouri Compromise. In 1818, Missouri attempted to apply for statehood after being recognized as a region attained by the Louisiana Purchase. This endeavor was originally unsuccessful. Later on, the Missouri Compromise is written, a piece of legislation that divided the nation across the 36th 30th parallel between North and South. Congress at the time was kept in a fragile balance between slave and free states, leading to a heated debate on whether states could decide their stance on slavery. The objective of this compromise was to relieve the tension from this debate, but it failed to achieve this goal. Instead, the Missouri Compromise divided America economically into industrialists and agriculturalists, politically into abolitionists and slave owners, and geographically into North and South, by establishing a line between slave states and free states along Missouri's southern border.
Before the Missouri Compromise, the states were in a deadlock in Congress, abolitionists and slavery ideals separating it too much for the decision to be made. It was a reason why Missouri's first attempt at statehood failed, and why it might have failed again. Around the same time as Missouri's second bid at statehood, Maine also attempted statehood. The Free State of Maine would be the perfect counterweight to Missouri's slave induction, yet most states weren't happy with this compromise. This is when the current Speaker of the House began to make his moves. Senator Henry Clay from Kentucky was known as the Great Compromiser. He served off and on in Congress for 50 years. Robert Remy, a historian for the House of Representatives and author of Henry Clay, Statesman for the Union, explained how Clay managed to create such an important compromise.
The answer, he said, was each side must feel that they have gotten something they wanted. But in order to do that, you must give up something that the other side wants, so that there are no winners and no losers. Clay recognized that what you have to do is get the North to back off and yet achieve some kind of victory in bringing an end to the further expansion and growth of slavery, and at the same time protect what the Southerners feel is their institution. And that is what the Missouri Compromise is about. In the Louisiana Territory, you draw this line at 3630, and there is no slavery north of 3630.
Clay recognized the stubbornness of Congress at the time. He came up with a plan to appease both sides of Congress's dilemma, addressing both the North and the South's worries. Although neither side was 100% satisfied, they were appeased enough that Missouri and Maine were both able to become states.
Major technological advancements resuscitated slavery in the U.S. and divided the nation economically between industrial and agrarian states. Before cotton became instrumental in the U.S. Industrial Revolution, slavery was on the decline. Cotton was originally a secondary crop, with only about 3,000 bales being exported in 1790. This was due to cotton being difficult to harvest and clean. It took many hands to remove the small and sharp seeds, which would lead to injury and potential infection. Until the cotton gin, patented in 1794 by Eli Whitney, it made cleaning cotton cost less time and effort, as well as reduced the chance of injury. Then, in 1820, the South exported about 335,000 bales of cotton. During the War of 1812, due to a lack of British finished products, the North began building textile factories fueled by a new technology. The power loom, invented in 1786 by Edmund Cartwright, made its way to the U.S., and there was a growing demand for cotton. Due to the North having many rivers as well as lackluster growing conditions, it became a region riddled with industrial opportunity. Together, the two inventions encouraged slavery as the total number of slaves increased from 657,000 slaves in 1790 to 1.5 million slaves in 1820, and set a clear economic divide between the industrious North and agrarian South, which increased tensions further. The Missouri Compromise only worsened these growing turbulences by establishing a distinct border between the North and South.
Before the Missouri Compromise, there was political tension and division in America. When Missouri applied for statehood, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. This equal spread of political ideology divided the Union on a national stage. John Cabell Calhoun, a congressman from South Carolina, believed that the North wanted to take political power away from the South with the Missouri Compromise.
I perceive you have a strong foreboding as to our future policy. The discussion on the Missouri question has undoubtedly contributed to weaken to some degree the attachment of our Southern and Western people to the Union. Should Missouri be admitted at the next session, as I think she will without difficulty, the evil effects of the discussion must gradually subside.
Calhoun expressed that if Missouri were to be inducted into the United States as a free state, then the political power of the South and West for the support of slavery would be diminished. This in turn would lead to increased political divisions and tensions in America. During the creation of the Missouri Compromise, the political spread of the House of Representatives was a staggering majority in favor of the Democratic Republicans. When the compromise first was discussed, however, the political lines were drawn majorly by northern and southern boundaries. Abolitionists and slave owners were the ones at odds during this debate, not Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Regardless, Congress admitted Missouri as a slave state, Maine as a free state, and codified Missouri's southern boundary as the designated line between free and slave territories. The president at the time was James Monroe, a Democratic Republican, who believed that compromise was the only way forward in terms of Missouri statehood.
The idea was that if the whole arrangement, to this effect, could be secured, that it would be better to adopt it than break the Union.
Monroe felt that it would be better to just admit Missouri as a state rather than arguing, as he feared that it would cause too much division between states and politicians. While Missouri's application for statehood ended in compromise, it still reflected echoes of political sectionalism in America.
America grew and was formally divided between southern and northern states as an effect of the Missouri Compromise. After Missouri's initial application for statehood was denied, the state tried again a year later in 1819. It was around this time that Maine, formerly a part of Massachusetts, applied for statehood too. The Joint Statehood Bill would add 2 new states to the Union, as well as one other important clause. Brokered by Henry Clay, the 30° 30 parallel clause was added. This stated that any Louisiana Purchase territory above the 30° 30 parallel line, bar Missouri, would ban slavery, while the states under it could own slaves. With the implication of the 30° 30 parallel line, the North and South were, for the first time, given a distinct border. The division between slavery and freedom, North and South, was not viewable on a map. This line would define the borders of future states, as well as the border for political ideologies and economic systems. Maine was put into a unique position with its own attempt at statehood. Originally its own colony, Maine was inducted into Massachusetts in the late 1650s. Since the Revolutionary War, Maine had been advocating for its statehood. When its 35-year campaign was about to pay off, Maine was thrown into a political issue it never wanted to deal with. With most Maine citizens being abolitionists, they were against the induction of Missouri into the Union as a slave state. Mainers were now against their own attempt at statehood. Yet the legislation was passed, and Maine was tossed into one of the most influential bells of the early 19th century. The American map was now looking much different. With the addition of 2 new states and a distinct line at the 30° 30 parallel, the baby Union was growing at a rapid rate. This growth came at a steep cost, however, one that could carry over into a full-on war.
The Missouri Compromise's constitutionality came into question in 1854 due to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It repealed the original compromise, allowing states to decide whether to allow states or not, as their constitution may prescribe. This idea was called popular sovereignty. Later, this idea was cemented in 1857 when the Supreme Court declared that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional in Dred Scott v. Sanford. It involved Dred Scott, who upon returning to Missouri after living in Illinois, a free state, sued Missouri for his freedom. However, this resulted in the Missouri Compromise being declared unconstitutional. Although the Missouri Compromise did not last a long time, it clearly revealed and catalyzed tensions between the northern and southern states. The Missouri Compromise caused conflict and sectionalism between the states economically, politically, and geographically, shaking the nation to its core and leading to the conflict known as the Civil War.